Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Kris Bowers, who composed the score for Blitz Bazawule's The Color Purple. Kris, music is obviously an extremely important element to this film, and Blitz himself has such a musical background. At what point in the filmmaking process were you brought on board, and what sort of themes did you and Blitz talk about?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the conversation. Yeah, so Blitz brought me on super early, like much earlier than I've ever been brought on for a film. I think it was maybe several months. I don't want to exaggerate, but even maybe close to 6 months before we started filming. And a big part of that was, we talked about the score needing to be the glue between the songs and these dramatic moments, and also needing to be in some ways an extension of the songs. Even if the score was going to have its own identity, it was important that we had some sort of tangential connection between the songs and whatever I was writing. And so he involved me that early so I could be embedded in the process of creating the pre-records for the songs. I also arranged a couple of those songs, but really I was a part of every single conversation so that I could listen to how they were approaching it, like intention wise, how they were thinking about rearranging these things, what Blitz's references were in terms of like uh, the different approach to the production of each of them. So by the time I started writing the first cues, I was able to be really specific about what I was pulling from in the songs, whether it was like the shape of a melody or the instrumentation used for certain characters. It really became a clear path for me in terms of starting to write the score based on being involved in that songwriting process.
And even when I spoke with the production designer, Paul D. Osterberry, he said he was listening to music as they were scouting the locations. I mean, music is really embedded into every part of this film. Have you ever been part of something like that before?
No, not at all. And also just, the way that Blitz wanted to break down the usual siloed approach to filmmaking was really inspiring. That, like, just as you said, for the production designer to have access to the music, for us to have access to the choreography or the costume design, like Blitz set up a Dropbox for all of us to be able to look at any other department at any point at what they were working on. And I really feel like that created this clarity in terms of what we were all trying to make, because there was that much communication, or at least transparency, between departments.
The original 1985 score was composed by Quincy Jones, so not big shoes to fill at all.
I know, right? Yeah.
Um, do you listen to that or do you try to avoid that? I mean, is that something you lean into or back away from when you're trying to come up with your own thoughts?
Yeah, I was thankful that Blitz encouraged me to put it away in our first meeting. Like, something that Blitz always talked about was that this was going to be our version, and that we really needed to stand firmly in that and not be concerned with how this compares to the original. Obviously, I also think having the book as a North Star was so helpful, because we're looking at Alice Walker's words as opposed to like another movie that had been made, or even the Broadway show. So for me, him encouraging me to do that, I actually literally listened to the score one more time the day we had that meeting, and then I put it away until after we finished the process. Like, after I finished recording the score, that was the next time that I actually listened to the score again.
You've written so many scores throughout your career. How much does it impact you or change your process when it's a musical?
I think that, there's just so much clarity in terms of material to be aware of and to be responding to. I'm not just pulling music from my own personal experience, or pulling music from whatever I think a cool reference might be. Like, there's a very clear musical history and musical language that's been established, and so it is an immediate wealth of information for me to look at, to start to pull from and study, and see how that might influence my process.
And when you're reading a script and processing everything, how do you come up with music to represent specific characters or the relationship between Nettie and Celie? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, seeing that those things are kind of jumping off the page, right? Like, obviously, Celie, we are with her so much, so she would need to have a theme. And then also looking at Celia and Nettie's relationship, and how much the even the idea of Nettie is so much of what keeps Celie in this state of hope or perseverance throughout her journey. And that music needing to have the carry the joy and like nostalgia that Celie has for their relationship as kids. So a lot of it is like, those are the first two themes that I wrote. And my thinking behind it was like for Celie's theme, it was a lot about this sense of like simplicity, a bit of like loneliness, especially in the beginning. It's very sparse when we first hear it, just a few instruments, and then as her story grows and as she steps into her power, it becomes a fuller orchestral sound. And then with Celie and Nettie, it was all about the joy of them as young girls, and anytime that reprises, it just feels like this lift, in the midst of what Celie's going through. And so wanting to have something that had that brightness and that sense of joy, and at the same time had a lot of scope and scale to it, because in a lot of ways, that huge swelling of emotion that she gets from her connection with Nettie, and that comes in at the end of the movie. I feel like those are some of the biggest moments in the score was their theme. So starting with those two poles of the spectrum too, I think was really helpful in terms of instrumentation.
How do you decide on the instrumentation? Like the beginning, we hear that banjo, and how do you decide what instruments you want to use for a particular film?
Yeah, so with this one, the banjo actually was really helpful because Blitz wanted that to be the instrument that Mr. plays, and we talked a lot about, how do we make that first piece of music that we hear Mr. play, uh, even though it's banjo, feel like something that even a 14-year-old kid that listens to hip hop would feel like, is kind of dope. So I feel like for me writing that, like I worked with Nick Baxter to write that theme. Um, a lot of it was like looking at references, whether it was like Goody Mob or like, Atlanta hip hop. Like there were always these hip hop references that Blitz would have um, uh, to help launch that process. But for me, instrumentation wise, then I was like, okay, well, how else can I take that intention of using banjo in a different way for the rest of the score? And so there's a lot of elements or a lot of moments where it's detuned banjo, or like banjo that's literally just like rubbing the skin of the belly of the instrument, and that creating a texture. A bunch of other effects with the banjo. Then the choice to use upright bass um, for Sophia primarily kind of came from how they were approaching Hell No. For Suge, I chose to use drums and like some jazz horn elements, and a lot of that was just because of how much she brings in this aspect of jazz into the story. So again, it kind of always goes back to at least the beginnings of it, like story and how to pull from that. And also, lastly, I'll say that the Ghanaian percussion that came from Blitz being so specific about this is not just Africa. We are with the Ashanti tribe in Ghana, and being that specific about it led me to then work with a Ghanaian percussionist for that section of the film, and talk to him about some of the traditional music for that tribe, about these experiences, and writing pieces of music around that sound as well.
How much does it help to have a director like Blitz who has so much musical knowledge, who has roots in Africa, and he says he doesn't really approach anything without looking at it through a hip hop lens.
Yeah, I think that I really don't think anybody else could have done this movie in the way that Blitz done it has done it, and I don't think anybody could have done it better. I mean, the way that he uh shoots all of the dance sequences, the way the camera moves to the music is just so incredible to me. And then as far as our conversations, I think that hip hop language was so helpful because, like even though we have different backgrounds, I think that's so interesting that like for both of us, that's culturally such a huge part of our upbringing. And so if he says like, this piece of music that is orchestral reminds him of Jay Dilla, like I know exactly what he's talking about. And so I think having that shorthand just already inherently baked into our culture is really interesting. And then outside of that, I think what's so dope about Blitz is for him to have the clarity of musical knowledge to know what he likes and what he doesn't like, but at the same time still talk to me like a director. So we mostly are talking about emotions. Like he's not trying to talk to me too specifically about musical things in terms of like keys or instrumentation. It was more so like here's how I wanted to feel, and sometimes those musical references came in, but they're mainly about how it felt.
And how do you go about balancing, the timing of the score, when to bring in those really big instruments, and when to take it back?
Yeah, as far as the scale, a lot of that was inspired by the musical format in that, the thing I've always loved about musicals, especially musicals that are done really well, a song doesn't start unless the emotion is so heightened that the character almost has no choice but to sing. And in my mind, I wanted to approach the music that way, that like when the emotion is really heightened and swelling, that's when the instrumentation is going to get big. But in these other moments where, you know, we're a bit more understated in terms of the emotion of the moment, then the score is going to be very small. So like even though there are moments where the score will get as big as like 100 instruments in a quieter moment, it wasn't just about using that large orchestra to play softly. It was like, no, we're now going to have like just a few musicians, and it's going to be like a really small sound to it. So a lot of that scale was kind of inspired by that, and then timing wise, uh, that's just one of those things that's like really um, intuitive. But with this musical format, a lot of times it was like helping us get into or out of a song as well, which I think helped set that pace.
What was the most challenging part of the process for you?
I think it's actually tough to say because being a part of it for so long, what was so great about it was that um we had so much time, like I literally wrote the whole score to the movie weeks before we recorded, which never happened. And so Blitz and I were able to watch it over and over and over again to uh decide like, okay, well this part needs to be a little bit bigger, or actually this is in the wrong key because we have this song just before it, and so we need to make sure that those keys line up. Like there was not that much pressure because we had so much time to really reflect on it, and we were in such a safe, trusting space that I never felt too stressed about trying to get anything right. If I had to say anything was challenging, I maybe would say that like the whole ending sequence, like when she first is reconnected with Nettie, because it's a longer piece of music, but it has all of these huge emotional moments. It's like she's reconnected with Nettie, which is like what so much of this movie has been about. So that's going to be a huge emotional moment. Then she's reconnected with her children, which again is something that this movie's been about. So like that has to be another lift. And then she meets her grandchildren, which she wasn't expecting. So like there's these like, and then they all embrace at the end. So how do you have these moments where you have a cathartic release with the music, um, but you have to kind of have that back to back to back and not have it feel like up and down, and also not have it feel like repetitive. So I think shaping that was maybe one of the more challenging cues, but even that, it was just, I think the emotion in this movie is just so palpable that it also was pretty easy to just trust my instincts and follow that.
And coming from me, someone who doesn't write music, and I could never compose a score, is your mind always seeing music? I'm curious how you continually come up with something new and fresh, and what your writing process is.
Music for me is like the kind of the only way I know how to release emotion, and the only way I know how to uh express and process the complexity of like the emotions that we or I feel on a daily basis. Like I might be struggling with something, whether it's you know uh something in my personal life, or like something with work, or just like work life balance. Like I might have a lot of these feelings internally that I don't really like. I could talk about it, but something doesn't feel like it's moved in me. It's like I'm talking about, like venting about something doesn't make me feel better, but playing music is often the only thing that will help me feel like, oh wow, I feel better about that thing that was just kind of like stuck inside of me. And so, I think that music is always in my mind primarily because it's the best way for me to like express or process like what I feel on a daily basis. And it's like the language I feel like I know better than anything else. So yeah, so it's almost more of a coping mechanism, or like a me and music and or the piano have like a codependent relationship. I think more than anything else. Yeah.
That sounds like something Seeley could maybe relate to in some ways.
Sure.
And you've been making the rounds at screenings and premieres. What's it been like now to see the film in its final product and just finally get that audience feedback and the way people are responding?
Yeah, it means so much. I mean, from the time I got the call to do this, I was really aware of the honor that it would be to be a part of a work as important as The Color Purple, especially to, you know, um, the Black community. And so for me, I feel like it's been so exciting for this movie to be shared with everyone and for them to have the same response that I had um, watching the first few sets of dailies that I received. Like I remember from the first images I saw, I was like, I can't wait for people to see this. And so to finally have that out there, I think it feels so amazing. But also, speaking to a couple of people who have experienced abuse or have experienced being in some sort of uh, dynamic where they needed to fight their way out of it, and how this movie has helped them see themselves and help them uh, process that in a different way, I think has been another incredibly beautiful thing to be a part of.
Well, Kris, congratulations on the film. It's some beautiful work and best of luck to you and the entire cast and crew of The Color Purple this award season.
Thanks so much, Dan. Appreciate it.